There you go. You got it now. Thank you, Father. Okay, gentlemen, me again. I like this mic. You can't talk over me in this one. Yes, you can. You definitely can. So we lucked out. The conference tonight was going to be kind of led by me and having you guys discuss this, but Father Ortega came in and he is way more interesting than I am, and maybe you guys too, because he's another friend of Bob. How great is that? Yeah, what do you call the Pope? Bob. That's what I know him as. So it's great. So, Father, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Let me see if this one works. I'm not great standing still. Hang on. How about this one? Yeah. Usually drive required director in Florida, and that's when I was like this. Stand still. Stand still. All right. Let's see. It's on here somewhere. Can you hear me now? Yeah, all right. Ooh, a little loud. Okay, and for those of you who didn't catch me the last time, because I talk fast because I'm from Jersey, my name is Russ Ortega. I'm an Augustinian and a priest for somewhere around 40 years, give or take. And tonight they wanted me to talk about Eucharist, food for the journey. And I'd like to just go back a little bit in history because we're still kind of in that historical thing, especially us old guys who grew up way back when. And up until basically Pius X, people went to receive the Eucharist, went to communion about once a year because there was the G word. What's the G word, guys? Guilt, right? We were sinners. And you couldn't go but once a year. See, what you did your Easter duty, went to confession, and then, well, you started sinning again, so you had to get to the back of the line again. And Pius X came in and said, look, it's not just about guilt and sin, it's about receiving the Lord and receiving grace with the sacrament, that the sacrament can receive sins. It can, pardon sins. And it's about receiving nourishment and food for the journey. It enriches your life. It gives you grace, comes with the sacrament. And so you can receive every Sunday because you need to be fed in order to be able to live a good life. And this was earth-shattering, absolutely earth-shattering. Because up until then, I said people went once a year. And it's like, wow, really? But there was always that little bit in there because those of us who grew up way back when, and there's a few, I'm not the only one here with gray hair and receding hairline. We still grew up with, I can remember Sister Pierre used to play for a communion hymn every Sunday, my whole 8 years of grammar school at St. Michael's School in Cranford, New Jersey. Used to play, "Oh Lord, I am not worthy." And there were 12 verses to that song. It was a long song. So just in case you forgot as you were going up to communion, you are not worthy. You're a sinner. And they traipse us over once a month for confessions for First Friday, right? Yep. And just in case as you were going over to be forgiven, just in case you forgot that you were a sinner, Sister Ann David, the principal, was waiting there at the curb with the toady there with her little pencil. And if you didn't have your tie on straight or your beanie on, if you were a girl, she'd be waiting there going, bang, smack you on the back of the head, and you'd get the wrath of God on the way over. And, we had little tricks too, but, oh, well, I'll tell you one. Father Duffy, I won't say what it was, but there was a certain sin you didn't confess to Father Duffy. Because if you did, he'd go, "You did what?" And then Sister would go, "Don't you look, don't you dare look." So what you did if you went to Father Duffy was you add one more to your lie column and you erase that one. Now, of course, you can't do that, but that's cheating. But hey, any port in a storm, nobody wanted to be that person who heard you did what. But at any rate, but we grew up with that. And there was always that tension between being the guilty sinner and receiving the Lord in the sacrament. And we sort of still live with that. I hear confessions for every Saturday, usually for about, it's supposed to go for an hour. Well, the other priest I'm in there with is a little bit, he's a little bit stricter. He well, he's done it about 40 minutes. I usually go for about 2 hours. Um, People know which week we're on, so I have a tendency to go a lot longer. But at any rate, there's still here confession, and there's still our generation still has that sort of tension between there. And the fact is that it's about the fact that it's not about the difference between sin and not. It's about receiving the Lord and receiving the Lord's mercy and love and forgiveness. And the two aren't opposed to one another. They complement one another. That they're both about the Lord's presence and mercy in our lives. And it's about nourishment for the journey. It's not about the fact that, well, you're imperfect. Who is? I've lived with a couple of people, frankly, I've lived with a couple of people who thought they were perfect. They weren't. In fact, they were actually kind of hellish to live with. Um, really, I'm not kidding. I won't tell you stories about them, but I think that it really is. We're not perfect human beings. We all think we're charming in our own way. But I can be a pill, I'm sure. In fact, if you talk to some people who live with me, they'll tell you some stories. But the fact is that we're not perfect human beings. We make mistakes. It happens. But the fact is that most of the time, we are who we are, and we're loved by God as who we are. Imperfect, make mistakes, get over it. But I think that so often what happens is we carry stuff. We're great at this. We are great carriers of guilt sometimes for years. And the fact is, I think one of the hardest things for us to do is to let go. Let go. I have people coming to confession who have confessed things they're in their 90s, who will confess things for the umpteenth time that they did when they're in their teens. For Pete's sake, how long are you going to punish yourself? Get over it. St. Augustine said something that was really important. The past is for learning. You can't change it. You'll learn from it. You can change the present, you can change the future, but you can't change the past. So get over it, because you can keep beating yourself up and what is it doing for you? And I always say to people, I learned something a long time ago. If you're mad at somebody and they've really got you all twisted knots and everything else, guess what? They're probably sleeping at night. You're not. So you got to ask yourself the question, who's got the problem? Not them. They probably didn't even know you hacked off at them. Guess what? Who's got the problem? We need to get a little bit healthy about our guilt and that sort of stuff. And that's not what the Eucharist is about. It's not about the guilt and it's about the presence of the Lord and receiving that presence and trying our best as we can to live honoring that presence in our lives, nourishing ourselves in that presence, that we might live lives conforming better to the example of Jesus Christ. That's what we nourish ourselves for. Do we do it perfectly? No. We don't. We're not perfect human beings. I'm not, you're not. All God's children are imperfect. But we do that. We nourish ourselves in that we might go forth and live better. And Jesus gave us that we might nourish ourselves in a way that is completely physical. That he didn't leave us something to read, something to memorize. He left us something that we tangible, that we can hold in our hands, that we can receive, that becomes part of us, constitutive part of us as a human being. Not some phrase to remember, but actually part of us as a human being. Something constitutive, something basic, and even that simplicity sometimes can fool us. But it's something constitutive that becomes part of us as a human being. And I think that that's an important thing to realize, is that the Lord becomes part of us. But the Lord is part of us, because as St. Augustine tells us, that Lord is more intimate to us than we are to ourselves. As I mentioned before, we have a spark of the divine in us, each one of us. And that is where we find our happiness, connecting up, nourishing that. And one question I get a lot from people is like, well, if the Lord is present and the Eucharist is so powerful a presence, why do we have to go every week? Why can't we go once and punch our ticket and that's it for a lifetime? Right? Good question. Very practical one. Kid asked me that once. Simple. We human beings have capacities, right? I can live on the side of a lake of this big, beautiful, wonderful, billions of gallon lake. Crystal clear water, more than enough water for me and a million people. There's only one problem. I can only handle it a glass at a time. Same thing with the Eucharist. I've got a capacity. I can only handle it one reception at a time. And think about it. How many times have we all gone on retreats and stuff? And we leave the retreat and we're all filled with the Lord and filled with fervor and everything else. And usually by about Tuesday or Wednesday, we're back. The air's out of the tire, right? What happened to the fervor? I don't know, it's gone. But we have capacities. We do that. We have capacities as human beings. It's like that with the Eucharist. It's there, it's powerful, it's a presence, but we can't hang on to it. We kind of fade off and go back. So we need to go back and nourish ourselves again. The powerful image of the lake. You know, it's a wonderful thing though, but we go time and again. But also one of the things is about participation. Is that, but sometimes we don't value things as much as we should. And that's a wonderful human thing we have. We have the value to value things. Sometimes we don't, because we do it every week. And so it becomes habit. Well, think about it. I mean, when all of a sudden, when somebody is sick, what do? All of a sudden, it's like, we think about that. Oh my God, what would I do without? Right? What would I do without? My husband, my wife, my whatever, my child. Suddenly their value comes up. What happens if I lose them? Oh my God. Then they get well and it's back to the same old routine again. But why does it take a disaster for us to value someone? But that's what happens. I've worked in jails, I've worked in a cancer hospital, and I run into that all the time. Why does it take a disaster for us to value something? Why did our lives have to go to hell for us to value something? Really? Our lives go to hell, we go to heaven. Our minds and hearts go to heavenward. Funny thing, but that's us. But I think that we don't value, I think, often enough the Eucharist. We go because we do our Sunday routine and sweet time and time again. But all of a sudden, a member of our family gets sick. All of a sudden, we're there and we're praying, Lord, I'm here. All of a sudden, it means something. Someone dies, we go, and all of a sudden, they're there and we pray for them and pray for their souls and ask their prayers for us. All of a sudden, those occasions bring home to us something that we take for granted all the time. Why is that? It's just us. We do that. We take things for granted. And yet every celebration of the Eucharist is important. The thing that I tell people is that people find this incredible. I've never celebrated a private mass by myself in almost 40 years. Some priests do it every day. I never have. Because it doesn't make sense to me. Celebrating a mass without you folks around doesn't make sense to me, because you and I together are what make a liturgy happen. That you are important to me in terms of that celebration, because it's together we make present the Lord. It's together we celebrate that presence. It's together we share that presence with one another in word and in sacrament. That is what nourishes me, is your presence, that we share it together. Not that I have to have it by myself. And some priests, if they find it very enriching, they find it very prayerful, wonderful. God bless them. It never has happened for me. Because you are an important part of that celebration for me. Your presence, your participation, your prayers are important to me. That's what makes it a liturgy for me. And people say, well, what do you do when you go on vacation? I hop in the car with the rest of the gang, go to Mass. Yeah. And people say, I go with the trainers that know out the parish in Coatesville. People say, you mean you just sit in a pew? Yeah, that's what they're for. Why not? There's something wrong with with my family that's not with anybody else's. Not that fits in the pew. I put on a few pounds over the years, but why not? But I think that there's a sense of the fact we forget about that. And to me, that to me is the participation of the whole community there, praying together, singing, being with one another, together, calling down the Spirit of God on the bread and the wine, performing Eucharist together, conducting Eucharist together. That to me makes a celebration. And I think that we forget that sometimes. Because in English, it's a little bit different. I enjoy celebrating in Spanish too. I mean, I've done it for years too. And I think that we forget, most English speaking people, when they go to a Spanish celebration, are like, they think it's a little nutty. But for one thing, because it's too long. In Spanish, we tend to go about an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah. Already I'm seeing people going, And most of the music is either merengue, salsa, or mariachi, which, well, most people, especially, especially for people who used to, only English, it's a little shocking. Although some of the old ladies like it because it sounds like Latin, but yeah, but it's, it moves. You tend to move with it too, but at any rate, but I think that there's a sense of the fact there's a different way of expressing it. That people get more involved with it and everything else. Whereas in English, you sit there and don't want to get too excited. But I think that there's a sense of the fact that participation counts. And I think that so often we see ourselves just as there. But participation, both in terms of externally, in terms of singing and that sort of stuff, but also internally, in terms of giving ourselves over to the experience, the prayerful experience of that. I think because sometimes I look up and I see people like, I'm giving a homily and people are paging through the missalette, and it's like the missalette. Good God, how boring! I mean, bring a comic book or something. I mean, bring something with a little plot to it or something. Yeah, the missalette am I that boring? Are you that desperate that you're reading the missalette? Um, but some do. When it's the altar server, I want to bring her neck, but I think that there's a fact that that if you involve yourself and let yourself into the experience, that helps. That I think too often we just go and it's getting through the thing, and of course then there's the communion darters that don't want to hang around for that dreaded final blessing. Um, God forbid. You know, but I think I got that down. I think it's genetic. Um, I think it goes from generation to generation. I think their mom and dad did it, so they have to do it. It's just sort of automatic. But I think that the fact is, you give yourself over to the experience and really participate in the fact that what is going on there is something important. And it becomes more important if you sit and you listen and you participate and you sing, rather than just be there. It's as important and as enriching as you allow it to be. And I think that's an important thing because I think too often it's just another week. But there's something there. There's something there. And I think also there's the call of St. Augustine to be what you receive. And I think that is a really important one. Be what you receive. You are the body of Christ. Or as Pius XII calls it, the mystical body of Christ. Be what you receive. Be the body of Christ in the world. Be what you receive. Go forth and be what you receive. And I think that's the challenge. The challenge to be the love, the presence, the compassion of Jesus Christ in the world as you go through your life day to day. And that's the gift and the challenge. Be what you receive. Be the body of Christ. Be the presence of Christ. Be the compassion of Christ. Be the acceptance of Christ. in what has become a very contentious world. That a world that likes to categorize. I don't even watch those channels anymore. I watch the Smithsonian channel. I watch forensic. I think I've seen every forensic files 10 times over. Um, but because, well, basically what I do is I do a lot of typing and that sort of stuff at night and use the TV kind of as a background. And also watch sports, of course, but no miss football games. But I think that there's a sense of the fact that everything's so contentious and it's all name calling and all that. There's more categories out there now than I can even count. And I'm too old for that stuff anyway, At the end of the day, I don't want to hear people fighting, you know? Sometimes you got to deal with that stuff during the day. I don't need that at night, I want to kick my shoes off and the heck with it, you know? So if they're sitting through an hour meeting or something like that, it's like, enough of that. But I think that there's a sense of the fact that we're called to be that. We're called to be a source of love, a source of compassion in the world with one another. And it's surprising we can be. But also, I think that sometimes it's just as simple as, let's face it, if you got a house full of teenagers, okay, just being the presence of Jesus Christ in a house full of teenagers, that's challenge enough. You don't even need to go beyond the front door of your house. Just getting to bed with them and keeping the roof on the place is enough, But I think that there's a sense of the fact that accepting that challenge, be what you receive. I think that's the most important of all. That is the most important position of all. Giving yourself over to that, being that gift that you receive. So I think that there's a whole lot more involved with it than just going through the motions. If you choose, the gift is there, the gift is real, the gift is powerful, but the gift is yours to receive. How you receive it counts for a lot. And it means a lot to see people taking that seriously, to take what it means to be that presence, take what it means to listen to the word, and to process that. Some of the stuff, hey, some of the Old Testament readings are a little tough, but they still make sense. I'll grant you, some of them are even fun. I wait every Lent till they get to the reading with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Nebuchadnezzar. That one, I live for that one. The readers get up there every year and stumble over that sucker. That's fun, but a little kind of mean fun, but it's fun. Hey, you got to have some fun. But I think that the fact is the fact that there is a challenge. There is a joy. There is a need for us to be who we are called to be that presence, to receive that presence and take it seriously. That our world is very much in need now of a healing presence, of a presence that speaks of joy, a presence that speaks of love, a presence that speaks of compassion, a presence that speaks of the real presence of Jesus Christ in the world, that seeks to divide, and we seek to unite. We speak a message of unity, we speak a message of peace, we speak a message of Jesus Christ alive and well in us and for us in the world. It's an important one. And the message is ours, the call is ours, day to day as we go through our lives. The Eucharist is there to feed us, to nourish us, and to remind us of who we are, and to feed us in that quest, to live that out day to day in our lives. So that's pretty much the short version. Anybody got any questions? Gee, I hate when people pile on. Okay.
Well, you talk about the Eucharist. That was hospital ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to go, we went on Sundays and brought food to people in the hospital, especially like in a hospital, probably familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a situation, and the other ministers were saying I was wrong. And I says, no, I don't think I am. The person turned around and said to me that I'm not in proper dispose to receive the sacrament. So I said, well, you're having this operation tomorrow. And I think, it's not a matter of you being the right disposition, but you need the love of Christ right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm maybe not giving you the sacrament, but I'm going to give you the love of Christ for that. I'm going to go through the whole thing. So they turn around and I said, well, first of all, how do you know on a Sunday, everybody going up, are they truly in the right line of mind? So a priest is not going to ask you
No.
that situation. So it's your self-conscious to say if to you. So I respond to the guy and I said to him, once you go back and get home, please have a priest come over to your house
Yeah.
and have a confession for yourself. And when you have the confession, the communion that I just gave you, you will then receive the sacrament.
Yeah. Well, I tell people, look, if you got any doubt, confess it later because otherwise, you can't. And tell them, the seminarians that I have working for me, if I'm not around or something like that, when in doubt, err on the side of compassion, and then they can go to confession later. It's backwards, but that's okay because what we're about is ultimately not about barriers. And I think that because every when I used to teach classes in this in parishes, they'd say, well, what if somebody comes up and that they're remarried and they're divorced and remarried and they didn't. I said, whoa, I know where you're going with this. Don't do it. Well, I said, you don't know what I know. I said, how do you know their annulment didn't come in the mail yesterday? You don't. So meanwhile, you're going to humiliate them publicly, and you don't know. I says, I know more than anybody around, any of you people in this room know right now. And I can't tell you how I know it. And I says, I wouldn't do what you're about to do or what you're contemplating doing. Don't do it. I says, give an example. We had a lady in parish, and there was a relative came with a woman in the parish, and she came up, went to communion, and she was Catholic. Well, one of the ministers followed her out to the parking lot and started giving her, passed out a fit, and he should have. He said, who do you think you are? He says, number one, he says, if anybody's going to say something, it should have been me. And I was going to. But he says, don't ever. He says, you're out of the ministry. That's it. He says, you have no role of discipline in this community. None. He says, as a matter of fact, the word is extraordinary minister. He says, that's not your job. He says, I'm an official minister. And he says, I wouldn't do what you do. He says, you publicly humiliated a person who didn't know what they were doing. He says, not to mention, in fact, it just went on and on. But you have to be careful about stuff like that. Always err on the side of compassion. Rules are important. I'm absolutely. I used to run into the same thing with the sacrament of the sick. I had seminarians coming for their 3 hours of pastoral ministry in their senior year in the seminary, and in New York this was. And you anointed somebody who hadn't been to church in 30 years. I says, you can't do that. I said, yes, I can. And I have. But you guys, read the beginning of the book. Read the theology of the sacrament. It's called Prenotanda. You guys like Latin. I says, that's some of the little Latin I know. Read it. I says, it's about compassion. It's about forgiveness. I said, then read the words of anointing. Through this holy anointing, may God in his love and mercy fill you with the grace of the Holy Spirit. May the Lord who frees you from sin save and raise you up. I says, it's about that. I says, look, it's about getting them involved. I says, if you can get them to sacramental reconciliation, great. But at this point, at least you're bringing them back towards the community and you're touching them sacramentally. I says, that's what you want to do. You want to reach out to them in love and compassion and mercy and bring them back towards the community. I says, what you're doing is, if I'm coming over from Sloan Kettering and then an hour and a half ride in an ambulance, and I'm a little short on morphine at this point, and you come in and start pulling out your calculator going, that's 52 mortal sins a year times 30 years. I won't repeat what I'd say to you. I says, believe me. But I says, I'd kick you out of my room. I says, there'd be the end of my encounter with religion in this hospital. I says, you have to be careful. I says, people, you have to be sensitive. I said, what are you going to do? Is that what you're going to do? Well, it is a moral night. Oh, stop. But people, you got to watch. Rules are important. They are, no question. But so is compassion. Mercy, there's three letters in mercy in all the Romance languages, C-O-R. They're short for heart. At the center of what we do has got to be about heart. Okay? So rules are important, yeah. But in fact, they used to, when the other, and even the Jewish chaplain used to use, when they couldn't get into the room to do it, you had to do an assessment, a religious assessment on them. When they couldn't get into the room, they go, one of Russ's. I get my alpha people, one of yours, you know, in 203. So I'd go up and I'd get in the room. Because they'd go up and say, hi, I don't want to say a prayer. I go, take my collar and go, hi, I'm Russ. We talk, and I walk in the room, just barge right in. And they just the fact that the priest took off his collar and dropped it on the floor, but and they said, well, you're repudiating your priesthood. Is, oh, blow up, you know? Give me a break. I'm not repudiating anything. I still go to bed every night by myself. I'm not repudiating a darn thing. I says, the fact is, even a fuller brush man tells you if you can't get in the door, you're not going to make a sale. I says, and the fact is, I get in the door. I said, the rest of them all tried. They didn't do it. I never fail. I said, in all my years at that hospital, I never failed to get in the door. I said, if that's what it takes, fine. I said, some of them have legitimate experiences. Just one quick story. I had a lady who came to Mass one Sunday. We used to have Mass in the chapel at the hospital. And this lady come down, and she came with a friend of hers. Everybody else was in their wheelchairs, and they're all falling asleep and everything else. I had to couldn't find anybody to read, and the other chaplains were all busy. So, could you please read? You know? Well, I don't know. I said, just listen, you're mobile. Can you read? You know? So I said, you know, I'm busy, this and that, setting up the kind of everything else. Well, okay, so she got up and read. I said, got the communion time. I said, yeah, you've been there, yeah, just here. You know, and then my beeper's going off, and people are dying left and right. It was just a crazy day. Well, 2 weeks later, I get this, my beeper goes off, I'm up on the floor. There's a lady named Margie who wants to see you in your office. I said, oh, well, whatever. So I went down my office and I said, oh, hi. Remember me? Yeah. She says, you don't know what you did for me 2 weeks ago. Oh boy, what, you know, here comes the other shoe to drop, right? What did I do? And she said, she says, I haven't been in church in over 50 years. And she says, the way you treated me that day, she says, I went to my local parish, and she says, the priest was rotten to me. She says, I went to another parish, and it was very nice. She says, I'm in the RCIA program in that parish now. Well, it turned out she actually ended up a catechist in the RCIA program after 50 years. And she went back to the church. She ended up a catechist in the RCA program down the road a bit. And she was wonderful. She was the assistant director of the Brooklyn Museum of Art. Brilliant lady. Her name was Margie. She sadly died of Alzheimer's a couple of years later. But brilliant woman, brilliant woman. But she came back to church after 50 years. I didn't think, I was desperate. I'm just looking for a warm body that can move and is not going to fall asleep on me before the reading gets done. And she was the only one that was mobile that day. They didn't have wheels under her and falling asleep. To her, that was invitational. I included her. She came back after 50 years. And then she used to come to see me once in a while, and she'd have a list of questions. Well, after a while, she didn't come as often. And she apologized to me one day. She said, I'm not coming to see you as often. That's good. There's no, I mean that positively. Margie, you're growing. You're answering your own questions. Wow. You know, but I think that, you know, we forget sometimes little gestures, little things make things happen for people. You never know. You know, I always say to people, look, it's interesting, a simple question, a simple answer to a question can be it. How often do we say to people, how you doing? How you doing? And you keep on walking. Wait for an answer every once in a while. And it's amazing how Mother Teresa said something. Somebody asked her a question, what is the world's greatest problem? You know what her answer was? One word. God, I hate pylons. Don't all jump at once. What was the answer? One word. Huh? Nope. What?
Listening.
Close. Love, loneliness. Loneliness. And you know what the solution to loneliness is? Look in the mirror. You and me. Sometimes that's all it takes to help a person loneliness is to ask a simple question, how you doing? And wait for an answer. Sometimes you may regret it a half hour later, but sometimes they're that lonely. I always tell ministers, when you go bring somebody communion at home, you're bringing them two kinds of communion. One, the Lord, the Eucharist, and the other is you. If you can get in and out of a house in 5 minutes, you're not doing your job. Spend some time with them, listen to them, because they don't get out. You're going in because they can't get out. And listen to them. Open your ears. Spend a little time with them. They want to offer you a cup of coffee, go ahead. Even if it's lousy coffee, have some, you know? But the communion you bring to them is just as important, maybe even more so than because they need that. Because sometimes their own families don't. My father had an uncle that his family treated abominably. Uncle Charlie, I always tell my Uncle Charlie stories. Uncle Charlie, we were 5 kids in a family with, blue collar worker and everything else. And Uncle Charlie, when his wife died, his son and his daughter moved in, and they basically kicked him out of his own house, pretty much, And they took the place over, and and he'd be coming home for dinner, and it did his blue Plymouth, 58 Plymouth, a big old blue 58 Plymouth with everything else on the back, and the fins. And Uncle Charlie was there for dinner, which meant FHB, you know, because we had my mother needed to have to water down the soup or the gravy or whatever because it sliced the roast or chicken a little thinner because Uncle Charlie was there for dinner. And I said, why the heck does he always come at dinner? Because that's when we're all here. And see, the Uncle Charlie, and my father said, look, it's not about the food. And he said, if you tell your mother that, I'll have to kill you. She won't make your next birthday. He said, don't get me wrong. He said, I love your mother to death, but she's no good. He says, it's Uncle Charlie comes here because this wonderful chaos that sits around our kitchen table is something he can't get where he lives. He says, this is love to him. He says, if you ever say anything that makes him feel unwelcome here, he says, you're going out the door. He says, this is where he finds love. This wonderful craziness, chaos with this one going and that one going and whatever, and this spilled out. You spilled your juice again or something. This is love to him. And he says he's always going to be welcome here. We can always water down the gravy. We can always, water down the soup, whatever. Because he's always welcome here. And that's it. He says that sense of community, that sense that, and I think that's important. That that we provide that for people. Sometimes even en masse. Yeah.
When I take, I have two gentlemen that I take community to every week, okay, and I'm in my parish. I was gonna get to visit nursing home at least once a month. But I'm more, I'm more amazed that I get the gift to be able to do that than to be able to worry about judging or worrying about where these people are. I can't even fathom the story you told of a minister, knowing this person, wasn't Catholic. I'm just fascinated by the fact that I've been given this opportunity, this gift, to bring the Eucharist to these people and give it to me. That's I get so much satisfaction and charge out of that. As what you say about bringing yourself, that's how I feel. What I feel I'm doing. I feel like I'm bringing something special to them.
Yeah.
I can't imagine looking at any other way when you hold that when you give communion, when I give communion, holding the body of Jesus Christ in your hand and giving it to somebody.
It's awesome. It is. Yeah. And yeah.
I guess when I became at that first time they called the Eucharist minister, we had to have instructions. All at that time had to understand what you're doing, where they ordained you as a minister. One of the things that came up, it was just, that's not your only thing. Your true thing is to go to that person who is not here.
Yeah.
That's where it was. And remember the priest saying the next one is the one who's in the hospital that's worried about stuff. You're bringing me to that. It's just very valuable. So when Father, the pastor was getting people as candidates for the whole thing, And I remember saying, I said, Father, I think you could explain to them that there's 3 roles that you play as a minister, not just assistant to the priest and son of mass. You have to go out to. So when I was assigned, and I took the longest because when they come, you're coming in with the blessed sacrament. Their eyes are like baptism. Their eyes open up like with the whole thing. So you could go in and I got 9. You know, the same time they say, how you doing? I said, well, I'm no different than you. So I have like situations, blah, 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 blah. So I have the same pains, but I don't have pains that you're feeling physically, but I have pains of things that I have to be concerned about. So I chatted with them for about 10 minutes and I said, I pray the Lord, just pray. So like, it was like whatever. So when I came back, like I couldn't actually, but at the same time, they somebody in that room.
Yeah.
And I would go to them and say, did you receive, did you go to mass? They said, no, I'm taking care of it. So I said, well, please join us. You know, even though I'm here for her, will participate with us with this, the whole thing. So we give both. But I have to turn around and say, you know, I know, of course, you'll make an attempt to go to mass for yourself. But don't think what I did for you is your obligation. I'll only be doing it as a for you.
Yeah.
Like you had to but you have to have like instructions to know what you're handling. You're not just holding a piece of bread.
Oh no, not at all.
So but it shows like the love, and it was like it was just amazed me. Then when I went into the hospital, like the whole thing. And this person's got this tube, that tube, and they turn around and say to me, you know, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. I said, are you sure? And no, I'm not, but the whole thing. And I said, well, I'd like to spend time with this gentleman, but I can't because I got like other people in the hospital to do that. But when I came back and I go to Father Bookport, I said, what do you do on Wednesday when you make the hospital visit? Do you go through this? And he says to me, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I says, Father, you put your power with the book. He says, yes. He says, there's nothing. It's you're dealing. You have to know how to get around that with the whole thing. But I'm like pressed for time because I have 50 patients that have to see with the whole thing. He said, but if I have time, I'll go back and talk to that person.
Yeah.
I may not give them communion, but I go and go back to that person.
Oh yeah, yeah. You spend as much time as you can. I mean, even I was a full-time hospital chaplain, but there were probably 100+ Catholics in this hospital, so you have to kind of get around there. And meanwhile, then people are dying. I had 14 people died in one shift, and you have to do the paperwork. But yeah, you spend. I mean, a lot of times it's the simple thing of a lot of times families don't even want to talk to them because they're sick. Sick people make us nervous. I discovered that when I was in Peru, I ended up coming back up here because I had an accident. I ended up getting cortisone. I haven't learned how to walk again, but I ended up doing after a month in a Peruvian hospital. But I'm up here, and the funny thing is that I would be on like canes and crutches and all this other stuff. I'm lousy on canes and crutches. I mean, the ballet world lost nothing. Nobody's ever called me graceful, not even once. So graceful, no, not me. But I'd be up the top of the stairs and get 2 stairs down. All of a sudden, the crutches would go down, and I'd be like, "Help! Help! Help! Help!" But at any rate, it kind of it would be talking to someone that I knew even, and I kind of leaned towards them just slightly like this, just kind of lean towards them, and all of a sudden I'd watch it, and they'd be going, and it's like, and I probably did the same thing. Illness scares people. It really does. They'd actually be sitting like kind of leaning back, and I'm just very subtly. It wouldn't be in their psychological space or anything, I'd be like 3 feet from them, and I'd just kind of lean towards them little bit by bit. They'd be going bit by bit by bit. And it's like, what? No, I probably did that too. You know, I'm actually scaring the hell out of them, but they don't, and that's subconscious. I mean, they're not even aware they're doing it, but I am. I'm watching, and I never realized that I was probably doing the same darn thing. Sickness scares us. It really does. It confronts us, and we don't like it. Sickness and death are frightening. Um, you know, it takes, you know, and a lot of times in families even, you know, I find that we would walk into a room and, you know, somebody's dying and the family won't talk to them about it. No, mom, no, please, no, you're gonna make me cry. Don't do that. The hell, she's dying. I mean, you know, he wants to talk to somebody. Or I'd walk in and it's cancer. And you got people sitting back like this against the wall. I said, did you hug her? Just your sister. You didn't give her a hug? Cancer, you can't catch it. It's not contagious. Oh, you know? I walked in, my favorite was this big Italian family. And there's 10 people in the room, and the room's not that big. I mean, it's room for a roll-away bed in there, right? There's 10 people lined up along the wall. And the patient, they're like this. There's an older woman, and she's got her blanket up like this, and they're all staring at her. I says, what the hell's going on in here? I says, is this what you do when you go to grandma's house on Sunday for dinner? You all sit around and stare at her? I says, you know, you're scaring the hell out of her. As a matter of fact, looking around, you're scaring the hell out of me. I says, what is this? So I started picking on this one and picking on that one, got them going this and that. 10 minutes later, she took the bed. And they were all fighting with one another, just like family. And I walked out the door. You know, but people forget, you know, they're all, yeah, so she's dying. Okay. But don't stand there like you're waiting for her last breath, you know? And that's what they're all sitting there looking like. Is she gonna die? Is she still breathing? You know? 10 people staring at this woman. God, that's nuts. But yeah. Yeah.
I know that the priest has to like take the wine and also the Eucharist for like the sacrificial offering, but the way sometimes there's wine and the Eucharist at the mass, and sometimes, but most times like only the Eucharist. What is like, why is there's like so much?
It's a lot of it has to do with the pastor's preference. The parish I'm in, the pastor doesn't like it, doesn't like both species. Why? I don't know. The ideal is both. Like when I was pastor in Charlotte, we had communion on both species at all the masses, and so that was just the way we did it. So I had the ministers and everything else, but that it just depends basically on the preference of the pastor. They stopped it for COVID for obvious reasons, but no, it basically just the preference of the pastor, and having enough ministers to do it. But yeah, that's the only reason. And he's the pastor here. They had it one mass, and then they don't do it at all. They don't do it at all anymore. No, they do communion, but they don't do communion on both species. So it's a shame because I liked it, but the other thing I didn't like is when Cardinal Sarah, there was an indult that the ministers could purify the chalices. Well, I had 6 cups at every mass, and it's the sacred vessels and everything else. But push comes to shove, it's still washing the dishes. Well, there was a year there that was all by myself, and I had 6 masses on Sundays and Saturdays. Well, that's 48 cups I got to purify. Ain't happening. So he could take away the indult, but I kept it. Unless he wants to fly over from Rome and do the dishes once a week, I'm keeping it. So,
I have a curious question. With Pope Leo, do you think the push for Bill Atkinson would come through?
I don't think he plays that way. He might give it a little impetus, but I think he doesn't want to. Yeah, you don't want to see this thing is maybe it's up too high. So the volume's too high for one thing. I don't think he'd want to be seen playing favorites. I think he might, he'll see that it's done well, but I don't think he's gonna, he'll give it a fast track, put it on the express lane. He'll follow the rules. I mean, if there's a hitch or something like that, he might give it a little, but I don't think he's gonna, necessarily play favorites.
His father Farrell involved. Well, but Bonner was together with him. They were both teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe Farrell. Joe Farrell's another one. He's a Philadelphia boy. Yeah. And Philadelphia boys generally they don't color outside the lines. But and actually the Chicago boys don't color outside the lines much either. I worked with when I was in Chilocco, it was with a guy from California and a guy from Chicago. Boy, you want to talk about two different people. The Chicago guys are pretty traditional. They're more like Philadelphia. The California guy, they were different. God rest him. He died in his 40s though. But yeah, but he was different. But do I think? No, I don't think they're going to be a big. They'll fast track it. I think they'll make sure that it's done well. But so, but no, I don't think either one of them is gonna cut corners. That's not their style, either one of them.
Father, thank you very much. We have our new retreat ceremony. If you'd like to preside over that, or if you're done, whatever.
Whichever.
Convenient for you, sir. We're fine with that.
Whatever. Yeah.
Whatever. Okay, great. Open. Thank you, everybody. And then, so our new retreat ceremony. So our new retreatants, if you can come up with your sponsors and stand behind us, and we'll go through the list here. Sponsors, if you need grab. We'll figure to somebody. All right. Yeah, we'll grab somebody out there. Sponsors. One. John, you got. You got Terry Rossi, and you got another one too. All of our new retreat and their sponsors, if you could just stand behind us here. I could be your sponsor.
Got him.
You got him? Okay.